Hi there. My name is Nathan Moon, and I am a research scientist at the Georgia Institute of Technology in Atlanta, where I also serve as the Director of Research for our Center for Advanced Communications Policy. I'd like to take a few minutes and talk a little bit about inclusive wireless technologies and how they can support the independence and community participation of people with disabilities. And to do this, I'd first like to talk a bit about our Rehabilitation Engineering Research Center, or RARC, on wireless technologies. The mission of the wireless RARC is to integrate established wireless technologies with emerging connected devices and services to promote a transformative future where individuals with disabilities achieve independence, improved quality of life, and enhanced community participation. And our wireless RERC is funded through a grant from the National Institute on Disability Independent Living and Rehabilitation Research, or NIDLR. To do this, I'd like to talk a bit about our survey research first. In particular, I'd like to share some insights from the Wireless RERC's Survey of User Needs, or our SUN. The SUN is our foundational survey for wireless RERC research. It has been updated and administered continuously now for nearly 2 decades, since 2002. In our most recent cycle, we have administered versions 7 and 8 of our Survey of User Needs. The purpose of the SUN is to track how individuals with disabilities use wireless technologies, including smartphones and tablets, but also newer technologies such as wearables and smart home devices in order to inform industry, policymakers, and consumers with disabilities in order to support accessible and usable technologies for individuals with disabilities. What we have found over the last 5 years or so of our research is that smartphone adoption continues to grow dramatically among consumers with disabilities. In 2015 and 16, our adoption rate stood at 71% of our respondents, and now it currently stands at 89% of our respondents. This is actually a number that, according to the Pew Research Center's most recent statistics on smartphone adoption and use, is actually higher than the general population. At the same time, however, we have noted that users of these devices who are people with disabilities have often owned their devices for quite a long time, usually for 4 years or more. And at the same time, however, we also have noted generally high ease of use and satisfaction, with nearly 3/4 of our respondents reporting that their devices are easy to use and that they are actually satisfied with them. Generally speaking, what we can say is that within devices, assistive technologies, particularly screen readers and screen magnifiers, remain important, and they will continue to do so for the foreseeable future. AT is not going anywhere. At the same time, however, it is worth noting that newer technologies, newer features, particularly real-time text, and especially the use of intelligent assistants such as Apple Siri, Amazon Alexa, and Google Assistants, as well as the importance of voice control that these assistants may offer, is growing in importance of use and need to be considered in terms of their potential for accessibility. Also, as we continue forward, we should perhaps get away from taking a device-centric view of our technologies, which is to say that people only think of their technologies in terms of, this is my smartphone and I use it to make calls with. This is my tablet and I use it to actually do work with. Rather, let us begin to think more about a personal ecosystem of devices in which people will reach for whatever device is convenient or appropriate or handy at the time to achieve whatever task needs to be achieved, whether that is for work or for entertainment. It's particularly worth noting that this extends also to wearables and smart home technologies, as well as what we generally refer to as the Internet of Things. With all of that in mind, I'd like to share with you some deeper research that we've conducted within the wireless RERC around how individuals with disabilities have taken on smart home technologies and the impact that they are making in their everyday lives. So here at the Wireless RERC in Atlanta, we have conducted numerous focus groups. Here I'm going to present some focus groups we undertook a couple of years ago, working with our local partners from the Center for the Visually Impaired and the Georgia Centers for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing here in Atlanta, as well as Tools for Life, which is Georgia's Assistive Technology Act program, as well as the Shepherd Center Rehabilitation Hospital here in Atlanta for individuals who have spinal cord injuries and traumatic brain injuries. Our research has focused largely on three major issues. First of all, understanding what makes these devices accessible and usable, and what the major barriers and facilitators to those are, what users' expectations are in terms of what they view as socially acceptable and culturally appropriate, and then finally, to understand what factors separate the adoption and continued use of these devices from those things that may cause users to either reject them or abandon them. So let's talk a bit about some of the opportunities and facilitators. Perhaps the most important one is the increased role that voice control is offered as an additional way of inputting commands, and has been particularly important. And I want to point that that's been something that is, voice control is something that's been important for people who are blind and who may have vision-related disabilities, as well as for individuals who may have had a spinal cord injury and as a result are not able to make full use of their hands to be able to input using a keyboard of some sort. So as one user who was a quadriplegic pointed out to me, being able to have voice activated commands for home automation is what finally got me to say, okay, let's make that leap and give this thing a try. Not just voice control, but also voice control coupled with intelligent assistants, again, such as Siri, Alexa, and Google Assistant. And in the words of another focus group participant, I'm a quad and I have no hands already. And being able to operate these different things with one home automation system, adding voice to it, that added another level. It's also worth noting that for many of these users, the relative affordability, especially compared to legacy home automation systems that at one time cost tens of thousands of dollars and required a great deal of specialized know-how to install, has largely been superseded by devices that are easier to set up and may only cost in the realm of several $100s. And then users also have pointed out that they can also rely still on their smartphones, many of which have apps, such as the Philips Hue light bulbs, which have an app of its own, to actually control their devices, thus giving users a wide array of important options when it comes to control and input for these devices. However, they're not perfect. And perhaps the greatest challenge to accessibility we have seen is still in the area of device setup. As one user who is blind and is the user of a Nest thermostat pointed out to us in one of our focus groups, said companies try to accommodate people with disabilities, but you still have to have somebody sighted set it up. And then another user of a smart speaker where you had to rely on seeing an orange ring versus a blue ring, noted to me, of course, I couldn't see the orange ring. And so I would just keep pressing. I didn't know which buttons to press. I just had to keep pressing the button. I would wait 5 to 10 minutes, thus pointing out the importance for a lot of folks of trial and error and the frustration they may encounter in trying to set up these devices. However, there's also the potential issue of cognitive load. One of our most enthusiastic adopter of these devices for her home, who had a spinal cord injury and really, was enthusiastic about the potential of these devices, kind of pointed out that she had 47 skills. And yet the more skills she added, the more it was to remember. And she said, I stopped at that point because I was getting confused, which gets to the issues surrounding their ease of use. That you can have a device that can do 47 different things, but if you can't remember the commands to activate the particular skill, then this is a potential issue in and of itself. And then finally, the ongoing need for customizability for individual needs, such as one user who pointed out that even smart thermostats might not necessarily accommodate for individual needs, such as the one this user had around controlling her internal body temperature, which for her in her cervical injuries was a very important deal. I just kind of want to part with a few other considerations we've learned from our research. The first is just remembering and reminding all of us about the speed of technology adoption. Technology evolves faster in research projects, and it will. The pace of technology is only getting faster and faster. The second issue is misperception about what devices can and can't do. It may be that a device is technically accessible, but if users don't know that it's accessible or they have misperceptions, it may as well be inaccessible. So we must always be mindful about the issue of consumer awareness and the potential for misperceptions. That being said, I do want to kind of point out somewhat optimistically that the open and unfixed design of the Internet of Things devices does provide opportunities for us to design for disability, provided that we involve people with disabilities in design and development at the very beginning. And then finally, just because the issue of accessibility is an important one, we must always remember that technology dependence, privacy, and security are just as important. So some parting thoughts. Of course, the first is that people with disabilities should be included in all stages of design and development. And that while universal design should be a goal, it cannot replace accessibility. And that technology can be empowering until it doesn't work. And then the users vary greatly. And in fact, when we think about designing for disability, what in fact may work for one group of users may not work for others. And in fact, one person's solution may be another person's barrier. And as I've mentioned, accessibility is important, but it should never come at the expense of privacy and security. These things matter to people with disabilities too. And when thinking about accessibility, we should also be mindful about what users consider socially acceptable and culturally appropriate. Not just the user's experience of technology, but how others around the user might perceive their use of those technologies and how our technology makes us feel and how technology looks to others and what that means for interactions. And then finally, just remembering that accessibility does not always guarantee usability. And in so doing, we must always remember the role of policymakers and regulators in working to increase accessibility. And with that, I would just like to thank you so much for a few minutes of your time. It's a real pleasure to be able to talk with you all and to interact with you all in our upcoming conference. Thank you. Bye.